Good morning. Sorry, guys. I didn't have everything and a little delayed today between setting the event when I was in a different time zone and not realizing. So originally this was at 5 a.m. This week's classes, I've been a little off. But I want to go over recruitment patterns versus movement patterns and how to really dial those in and everything. Because I think it's really key that we recognize that just because a move looks correct doesn't mean all the correct muscles are working. And often the more advanced we are, the more experienced a lifter we are, the more we can mimic proper looking movement patterns while actually overusing muscles. And this is what sort of leads to injury, because it's actually why I don't like having mirrors, because a lot of times what we'll do is we'll see that we're shifting in a squat, right? We'll see we're doing one of these things. And then because of that, we'll be like, well, then I don't want to shift. However, just because we don't shift doesn't mean that we're actually engaging the correct muscles. And a lot of times what that actually leads to is us overusing specific muscles because we're not sure how to properly engage, or the muscles aren't strong enough to handle it, or whatever else. And then we end up overloading a joint or muscles, and that's where we get the injuries, okay? So we need to be conscious of those imbalances. So when I'm talking about recruitment versus movement, what I'm talking about is the muscles actually working with recruitment patterns versus the movement that you're performing, okay? And if an area isn't strong, isn't mobile, you're going to seek out mobility, you're going to seek out strength from other muscles to replicate the movement that you're asking your body to do. It's the amazing part about our body is it's going to try and find a way. It's also the sucky part when it comes to overload and injury. So if you're squatting, right, you want to not only think about what the movement looks like, but also what you feel engaging. And this is why we do that full 3-part prehab process, right? We're foam rolling to relax overactive muscles so they don't tend to compensate, and also then to help us mobilize the joints. We're doing the dynamic stretching to mobilize those joints so we can work through a full range of motion and everything is as mobile as possible. And then we activate underactive muscles, which again stretches and helps us build that joint stability, but it also makes sure that we have the mind-body connection to go into the movements. However, just doing that and then going into our training without being intentional with the movements can also backfire. We can't out mobility work all of our different movement compensations, okay? So you can't just do that, go in, just work really hard and not pay any attention. You've got to be intentional with your training. Every movement you do is an assessment. So even though we do the squat assessments, even though we do the push-up assessments, even though you might assess, at points, every movement you do is another chance to assess what's changing. Because the thing is, you might be fatigued from other workouts, okay? Things might be sore from other workouts. You might have had things in a different order that now make you feel different muscle groups, or have something be tired, right? There can always be things that pop up. As I add loads on my squat, even I'll notice that things start to, I see my weak links basically. So you have to be conscious that every movement you do is a chance to assess. And no, I don't expect when you're running that race or you're doing that 1 rep max lift that you're going to be thinking about exactly what's working. The whole point is to make everything sort of automatic for those situations. Okay. So every other thing we're doing, we're sort of practicing, and we want that practice to be as perfect as possible because we're going to repeat what we practice. Okay. So I'm going to pull this up just to make sure I don't miss any points as I go over everything, because I tend to get on tangents in my head. So when you're doing a movement, okay, if you're doing a lunge, let's just use lunge as an example, because lunges are often demonized for knee pain, right? Your knee going past your toe in a lunge is not wrong, okay? So we're going to start with that. Your knee can go past your toe in squats and lunges and not be wrong. Gasp, we've never heard that before. It's, knees can't go past toes. Where that became a problem and why that cue of knee can't go past toes came about is because people started lacking ankle mobility a lot. They started seeing this trend. And so people's weight would shift forward, the weight would shift on the balls of their feet, their heels would come up, they wouldn't load their glutes, they would overload their knees and cause injury because that was overload, right? It was too much for them to be able to handle. So that whole knees can't go past toes thing came about because this vertical shin angle loads your glutes a little bit more. It's less strain on the quad. And if you don't have as much ankle mobility, it's a little bit easier to replicate. So that's what might actually be limiting your deep squat is your ankle mobility. And as you see, the knee will travel forward.
Right. So it's not just hip mobility, it's also the ankle mobility. So we might even have to search out mobility restrictions in other joints because we'll start to seek out mobility from other areas. And again, compensate, right? To mimic the lunge, your weight goes forward, you go up on the ball of your foot because you can't keep your heel down. So you have to be conscious, okay? When I'm lunging forward, what do I feel working? And then also note that, hey, somebody might have slightly more movement forward and somebody else to help them engage their glutes, especially
we can't hear you.
They might even have a little hip hinge right below the glutes.
I think your microphone
but they're actually intentional. So one of the most empowering questions.
Your microphone is not right.
Okay. And especially as you start to speak about this, what do I feel working? Okay. When you go through, what do I feel working? Not only, does it look correct, but what do I feel working? Do I feel my knee caving in? Do I feel my glute? Do I feel this quad? Are there differences between the sides when I even then do the other side? Right. And we're never going to be perfectly balanced just because we're not, right? Our face isn't symmetrical, nothing is completely symmetrical. Okay, so we're never really fully balanced creatures, but we always want to be conscious of the imbalances we do have, of the differences between both sides, so that we can make sure they don't lead to overload and injury. Okay, so as you're going through the movements, constantly be aware of what you're working. This is where video comes in handy. Okay, because while you're doing that internal cueing,
Better? Better. Okay. I'll put on the shirt versus the jacket just in case too. So while you're doing the movement, you want to really think about what you feel working, because when you think about what you feel working and then you video, you can see how your recruitment patterns connect back to your movement patterns to then even make tweaks. Because again, sometimes when we're videoing, it's not just whether or not it's right? It's how can we tweak it to help? Because you might find that when you squat, because of a lack of ankle mobility, you feel like you have to put your heels up on something to get lower. Okay, that's a band-aid, and we don't want to do that because that's also shifting your weight forward. It is putting a little more quad emphasis. It's also not addressing the real issue, which is ankle mobility. So we might work on that, but in the process of working on it, right, we don't want to cut out squats. We still want you to be able to use them. So because of that, we might say, hey, you're still going to even do your barbell squats, but because you lack ankle mobility, you're going to do your barbell squats to a bench, because that's going to allow you to sit back a little bit more, have a little bit more forward lean, and stand up versus that upright torso, right? And then based on your femur to torso length, your positioning in the squat is going to look a little different. And you fighting to keep your chest up, like somebody who has longer torso and shorter legs, might be causing your lower back pain. So we also have to work with your build there, right? Or we change the loading pattern and add a front load, because that will allow you to actually brace your core better, stay a little bit more upright. So we can make all those different tweaks based on what you feel working, based on the videos too. Okay, so that's why you need to video everything, because you might even find that when you're lunging forward, you are slightly rocking out, or you are slightly rocking in, or this toe is slightly turning in, or this knee is slightly bowing out. And all those little things can hint at little compensations and imbalances. That back knee bowing out a little bit in the lunge when you're not trying to do the angle lunge and step wider means that that rectus femoris is potentially tight, and that can be causing some of your hip pain. It could be also why you're not able to fully engage your glute and get that full hip stretch right there, okay? So we want to assess these different things. And that's why you need to think, what do I feel working? As I video this, can I see little things I can tweak? Because then we can use different, like even tactile things to help you engage different muscles. Say you really struggle with engaging your glute. Not only can we place a band over here on the lunge so that when you lunge forward, that band is actually pulling this way. So you have to engage the glute. If you don't have a band, we can even add a block here. So as you do your split squats, you actually have to hold this here, right? And it's going to change the range of motion, but it's going to help you push out and really get that engagement. So you can even use it to start. You can use a little ball that rolls. We can do different things to help you really get that recruitment pattern and actually feel the muscles working. It's the same thing with the mini band, okay? So when we're thinking about activation even, so those are all compound movements. And I'm going to take a slight tangent right here. So when we're talking about activation, a lot of times it's going to be more isolated movements because we're trying to break things down to make it easier to feel the specific muscles working versus compound movements. So like people be like, oh, I did like glute activation. I did squats and lunges. I'm like, no. Those aren't activation. Yes, they are working your glutes, but they're working a lot of other muscle groups too. And it makes it harder to really focus on getting that pump, that burn, that mind body connection established. Okay. So when you do compound moves like lunges and squats, lots of things have to work together. And that's not bad, but we want to go in with that mind body connection. Okay. Those things you're going to load down. When you're doing the isolated moves to activate, it's not about adding loads. Okay. I want you to have a strong enough mind body connection that when you do a body weight glute bridge, you can feel your glutes shake. Some of you have heard the story when I was telling it the other week, but Ryan was starting with some glute activation and he's like, oh, I get how someone could think this was easy because I didn't really feel it, but I know that means that I didn't actually engage my glutes, or I don't have that mind body connection to do it in these movements, right? So we need to realize that if we can't feel the muscles working in body weight movements, it's not because we're above them, it's because we're not actually activating the muscle, we don't have the mind body connection, and we probably even need to regress to that point, okay? That being said, when you add in things like the mini band, because it you're pressing out against it, it can really help you establish that mind-body connection. So you might even find that you need to use little things like this, not trying to go heavy, not trying to create the progressive overload, which is where I was going with the whole compound movements where you're actually trying to add weight. You're just using this to get that little tactile cue to help you engage better. Plus, with our glutes, if we engage the glute medius, so the side butt, it can better help us engage the glute max. So you might find that you need to use a light mini band to help to start, okay? But then your ultimate goal is to be able to take that off and go and do the body weight glute bridge and feel the muscles working. So sometimes you even want to think, okay, I really struggle with this movement activating my glutes. Can I do a move I feel a little bit just to wake them up before I go into it? And that can really help as well. But then even putting your hand on the muscle, guys, and knowing that it's going to take time sometimes. It's going to take time sometimes to establish that mind-body connection and correct those recruitment patterns, okay? But then even with that, if you feel things working that shouldn't be working. So if you're doing the basic glute bridge, right? This seems like such a basic move, right? But we can change how you drive your elbows down. We can cue you to drive your knees towards your toes more. We can even have you rock back on your heels versus the balls of your feet down, right? This can actually engage more hamstring in some people. This can be hard if your ankle mobility isn't there. We can change the posterior pelvic tilt, how high you bridge up. It's not trying to bridge up higher, right? It's just trying to extend through with your glutes to drive the hip extension. But say you're doing this and you feel your hamstring working no matter what you do, okay? That's where we go back to even the rolling. All of a sudden you take the ball out, you sit on the bench, wherever you feel really engaging, you try and relax the hamstring, because by trying to relax it, when you go back in, you can help this be less synergistically dominant and actually get your glutes working. So this is why it's key. You let us know what you feel working so that we can even make those adjustments, saying, okay, I want you to try rolling this out, see if that then inhibits it, relaxes it enough, interrupts that mind-body connection. And the great part with rolling is it doesn't reduce power or strength in your workout. And then we'll go back to activating, okay? But sometimes we have to do that. We have to take those pauses, which is why it's good, or it's key that we don't just focus on trying to train harder, right? Because I get when you get into a workout, you're like, I just want to go, I want to sweat, I want to do it. But when you're first starting out, sometimes regressing, sometimes modifying, sometimes slowing down a little bit is going to help you be more intentional. Because the simple fact of the matter is what you feel working is actually getting the benefit of the movement. So if you're doing abs and trying to do a harder variation than you've earned and your lower back is taking over, your abs aren't getting any of the benefit. So your workout, you're kind of wasting effort. And we don't want you to do that. We want you to get the most out of the time you have. Okay. So you have to be conscious of what you actually feel working. And then you do have to be willing to just take that step back. Because I can't tell you how many times I've built up in a squat and been like, all right, feel that one bunch, turn it off, feel this on this side, whatever else it is. And I go back to basics. I go back to lighter. I do a different variation, maybe front loading versus, back loading, whatever it is, but I take that step back. So if we're having you do front lunges, okay, and you're feeling that lack of control, we might have you go back to split squats, okay? We might have you lower weights. Regressing doesn't mean that you're making it easier. It means that you're making it fit what you need right at that point. And by doing that, a lot of times you might actually feel the muscle activate better, right? I can tell you sometimes I'll build up with loads on like the glute bridges and then I'll be like, oh, I'm fatigued. I can feel it shutting off. Okay, maybe next week I need to go a little bit lighter. Because sometimes you need to take that step back. Because even with what we feel working in that activation, that is driving muscle growth, okay? I won't do my bad Arnold impression, but he even talked about being inside the muscle when we would talk about muscle hypertrophy and trying to grow the muscles. Because feeling the muscle work and getting that activation can help drive muscle hypertrophy or muscle gains. Not to mention, guys, when you're intentional with that and you're doing some of the activation things, you're using metabolic stress, you're using potentially more mechanical tension, not just muscle tissue damage to drive muscle growth, because there are those three drivers of muscle growth. Okay, so we want to use them all for the best results. So even activation pays off in terms of gaining muscle from the perspective of feeling the muscle work can really help you recruit more muscle fibers, get that benefit, actually create a little bit more muscle tissue damage in the long run, and then get results. Not to mention you can use those other drivers, okay? I do just want to remind you too, with all of this, you're never going to be fully symmetrical. Okay. So as you go through, don't try and force symmetry, focus on what you feel working too. It's why I don't like just looking at the movement pattern, because if you do have different leg length discrepancy or different mobility restrictions or injuries, while we might not want to do a bilateral movement if it is because of like a specific injury or even a leg length discrepancy or scoliosis, whatever else, because you do have that shift, which is perpetuating the overload, we do have to know that each side is going to look a little different when we do different movements. But that's where we might go to unilateral moves. So if you've been shifting in something, we might say, hey, we have to go to lunges, or hey, we're going to do a bodyweight single leg squat off the bench, or hey, we're going to do an 80-20 glute bridge. Okay. So there's lots of different ways to tweak based on what you feel working. But if there's one thing I can empower you to do during your time with us, it's to ask yourself with every movement, what do I feel working? It might make your workout a little bit slower. It might make you not be able to do as much weight. It might make you have to do less volume and not feel sore after every workout, which is a whole other discussion, but you don't need to feel sore to get results. But I would rather that you wasted a little bit of time resting extra to roll an area out that you feel compensating than that you push through just to feel more work from it, right? Because the more intentional you can be with your training, the more you're going to get out of every movement and the better the results you're going to get and the more efficient you're actually going to become. Part of becoming stronger, part of becoming faster is that neuromuscular efficiency, or the ability to recruit the correct muscles to the correct extents in the correct order, okay? So you need to take that time to build up. You'll be surprised by how much it really improves your strength gains. And all this will relate back to you actually moving faster in your cardio workouts, running faster, lifting more, cycling further, all of that jazz. And especially as we get older, guys, that neuromuscular efficiency slows down, okay? We lose balance more easily. We aren't as coordinated. So the more we work on this now, the less we're going to see those things happen, okay? The stronger we're functionally going to be, not only from a lifting perspective, but from that coordination perspective, okay? So if you're asked to do moves, even that make you feel uncoordinated, right? The burpee, sit through to the whatever, to the dancing jazz hands, to the whatever. Part of that is also improving your coordination, that mind-body connection, okay? So it's not just the activation, it's not just the intentionality of lifting. Those moves that ask you to speed things up, don't rush through and speed it up before you've actually gotten the movement pattern down, okay? Slow it down to start so that you can actually learn it. I see this all the time when we do like footwork drills in the ladder. People want to go through really fast. I'm like, no, you have to go slow to actually do it. Because if you don't actually learn the steps, yeah, sure, you're getting a sweat going fast, but you're not actually getting the coordination, the mind-body connection, working on that neuromuscular efficiency. So slow it down to actually get the movement correct, then speed it up. And as you speed it up, you're improving that neuromuscular efficiency, that ability to move more quickly, right? Same reason to include jumping. Okay, I know some of us can hate on jumping, and if you do have problems with it making you feel very uncomfortable, for even pelvic floor issues, we want to address those, okay? But it's one of these things that you need to learn how to have those proper landing mechanics. You need to know how to accelerate and then decelerate properly, right? That's how you catch yourself when you step off the curve wrong. It's how you actually improve, again, that mind-body connection so that you're more coordinated, more balanced. You don't have falls as you get older. You're strong, okay? You could twist and turn and even prevent rotation while power, rotation, all those different things, okay? On top of all of this, okay, so we're talking about speeding it up, right? We're talking about the compound movements versus the isolation. We're talking about even going to unilateral, tweaking form, all these different things, the mobility work plus the intentionality in our training. Guys, this is also where slowing things down comes into play, okay? Not just tempos of lifts, but actual isometrics. I know people want to skip the boring iso recovery stuff because it doesn't feel really hard. It doesn't make you sweat a ton, but in these things, you are also working, even just holding a crescent lunge, you are working on that mind-body connection. Can I feel this glute? Can I actually engage this leg? Can I make sure that everything is in line? Can I press my foot down harder? You are creating that shakage through that mind-body connection, again, through that activation, okay? That is the perfect time to learn how to activate everything. Run through what you feel working. When you're holding that plank, think, do I feel my back? Do I feel my abs? Can I squeeze my butt harder? Can I flex my quads harder? Think about all the muscles working so that you have that mind-body connection you can run through and create that shakage very quickly, because you're actually strengthening through different positions. So you're strengthening here through that hip extension, right? So you can actually help improve your mobility and stability by strengthening through different parts of the range of motion, but also using the activation to improve your flexibility, joint mobility, joint stability, okay? So if it doesn't feel hard, focus on engaging harder. It's going to really, really hurt. Plus, like if you think about power, if you think about strength, again, neuromuscular efficiency, Bruce Lee's like famous for that 1-inch punch and was a huge advocate of isometrics because of the neuromuscular efficiency they created. So when we've laid out all these workouts, when we've laid out that warm up with the foam rolling, stretching, and activation, when we've laid out the recovery session, all these systems work together, okay? But to get the most out of them, you need to be intentional. You need to ask yourself, what do I feel working? And then any moves you don't feel working in any area potentially, or in the right areas, or you're not sure if it's the right areas or whatever else, film them, okay? The more you share with us so that we can even give you cues, the more you can even take those away to know how to tweak things afterwards if, say, your knee is acting up a little bit or your back is acting up a little bit. But the more aware of your own movement patterns and recruitment patterns you'll become, okay? So that is my spiel on recruitment pattern stuff. Any questions, comments, or concerns? We're going to try and seek this out here. Okay, so I think we got the mic. Well, yeah, we got the mic. Yesterday I pulled a hamstring, put my feet into bands to do a pull up. Should I have rolled my hamstring at that point? So if you cramped up, depending on what you did, obviously we want to address that, right? And that's not good because it sounds like in order to do some of those things, potentially your hamstrings are a little synergistically dominant. But yes, I would roll your hamstring out at that point. You don't want to stretch, guys, especially if you feel like you pulled it, because that can only further stretch and overstretch muscle. And especially with the hamstrings, there's a good chance it's overstretched. But I would say, yes, definitely roll it out. All right, well, hopefully that was really, really helpful, guys. And I'll be posting the replay so you can go back through it even to listen to everything and use all these things and be very intentional with your training this week and every week after this. All right. So have a great Wednesday, guys, and a great rest of your week.